So good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our Cadenhead tasting. I have to go back and look at the website. I honestly don't remember what we called this, if we did something cheeky like oddities or something tasting, but there are some unusual things in here. We've got some Enigma releases, these classics and curiosities. Someone was bound to get on it before I could load the web page. There you go. Thanks for that, Sammy. Um, Hope for those of you who are on the either Kensington Wine Market, still not an Advent calendar tastings or Uber Advent calendar tastings. I hope you're enjoying the journey. Evan and I, for the Uber one, just recorded two of the videos today. If you're not on that yet, we do have some available still for sale. The lineup is pretty baller. I think the average age is 19 years. There's a 44-year-old whiskey in it. Big mystery, I'm sure, for most of you, which 44-year-old whiskey that is. But it doesn't matter because it's superb. But I can't tell you which day that's on because there are also individual kits available for sale for those who are interested. Um, and as for tastings in general, as long as I don't get too distracted by staff and or other matters tomorrow, I'm hoping to take at least 4 or 5 January events live for those of you who aren't starving yourself of fun during the month of January. I know there are many of you who are, and no judgment here. Um, One must look after one's health, however one must. But the fun will not stop. We'll have lots of great events coming up in January and more in February too. But we've got a fun lineup tonight. We have 8 spirits that many of which would never feature in a lineup, but for the fact they came from Cadenhead or Cadenhead. Doug, my colleague tonight, or my co-host, is Doug Page, who is a whiskey aficionado, recent graduate of Springbank School, which is also owned by Cadenhead's parent company, J.A. Mitchell and Co. Doug, should we set the bar straight? I mean, I'm probably just going to say Cadenhead because it's easy, um, but that's not how they say it in Campbellton. Although they're
Uh,
not consistent there either.
no, no, and all parts of Scotland have different enunciations of it. I'm still traumatized slightly because I had a taxi driver refuse to take me back into town because when I asked him if I could go to Cadenhead, he feigned ignorance for 3 times until he so graciously responded that in fact it was pronounced Cadenhead. So
Man, well, I guess, do you tip taxi drivers in the UK? Like,
the tipping culture is different, and again, tipping generally, aligns with good service. And I think we could probably have a hearty discussion as the night goes along as to whether or not good service was provided in that situation. But
well, yeah, we don't want to trigger too many people, but we could drop the subject. Is tipping culture out of control? But that's a whole different matter.
ooh.
Yeah. So going back to that, how do they typically say it in Campbellton or
So
Campbelltown?
exactly. So interestingly, last time I was there in June, had this very conversation with Cameron, the managing director. He said that generally he does call it Cadenhead. With it, there are some times when he puts on his kilt and sporn and goes around, and generally in other countries, he said surprisingly that he'll call it Cadenhead, but generally when we were speaking about it, it was always Cadenhead.
Well, and I guess this gets to the heart of what we're talking about tonight is the business didn't start in Campbellton. So should we perhaps be asking how they pronounce Cadenhead in Aberdeenshire, which is
Oh,
Doric country?
yes, yes, I think that that's probably a wonderful place to start. Take us on a journey, sir.
Well, I think we will eventually, but I think people probably would like a dram first. And just to give people an idea, now it might already be too late for you, but on Doug's advice, we haven't poured ourselves the rums yet because we're going to go through the 6 whiskeys and then go back and do a speed round of the 6 whiskeys because the concern is the rums are going to be so overpowering, or at least one of them will be, that we just don't want that aroma out in front of us. So if you've already poured it, if it's already too late, maybe set the glasses off to the side a little bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to taste the six Cadenhead bottlings. That's how I'm going to say it for the rest of the night. And then we're going to go back and see how they've changed. And then we're going to tackle the rums separately because, especially on the palate, I think it's fair to say that once you've gone to the rum side of things, you can't really go back. So starting off with the Burnside 28 year. This isn't on our website, so I'm going to have to use the photo from the Cadenhead website. And Doug, this is a conversation I would love to have with Cameron. Why can't they just take decent photos of their bottles instead of putting these approximations on their website? It would make it so easy for their retail partners around the world.
I mean, this is half the fun of Cadenhead and our friends at Springbank is there are so many things and that they could do a little bit differently just to bring themselves up to at least 1999 or 2005 standards from
Yeah.
an internet perspective. But that's part of their charm, I would argue.
How about how all of the Springbank labels to this day are hand drawn by a man who I now believe is in his 70s, hand drafted. They're not
Yes.
digital in any way.
Well, and this is a fun story as well with Burnside because ever since the last in the lineage of the family Headley, right, who recently passed away, Headley was always, and Cameron talks about this, about how he would rarely ever use others' trade names for it with it if they didn't want, or even some of the secondary names that they would use.
Mm.
But since Headley's passed away, Cadenhead does own the Burnside name. There's a famous Burnside pub just a block or two away. Fun side tip if you ever do go to Springbank, a lot of the staff will be there. A couple of rounds of Guinness to the workers will go a very long way the next day if you have a tour at Springbank.
What
And
about
the
a maple handy?
that is a story for probably a cup of drams for now. However, you'll notice on this one, there's now a trademark next to Burnside. And we now have a couple of the independent bottlers who have moved from calling it Burnside to now Side Burn with it to try and be respectful. I don't think Cadenhead is going to be too litigious on this, but it's quite interesting to see how this will progress in the coming years, and if our friends at Balvenie continue to use the Burnside nomenclature.
Well, and Doug, this reminds me of a pin we should probably put in this concept because there was one distillery whose brand they did use and it involved a legal dispute, but we'll maybe save that for a little later. So this is a 28-year-old Burnside, which, as we know, is Balvenie teaspooned in theory with Glenfiddich, but it could be teaspooned with just about anything. 1996 vintage, Doug, good. I would say a notable vintage for at least two people in tonight's tasting. Um, I don't think we need to elaborate why, but we weren't born that year, but it was another significant year in history. Um, Blended malt, it doesn't mention here, but I've got to imagine this is probably an ex-bourbon hogshead, presumably something like that. We can maybe nose and taste it, see whether we think it's first fill or refill.
Yeah. Well, very interestingly, even on the teaspoon side of things, technically under SWA regulations, you have to keep blending records if you do in fact blend. And my understanding is no blending records were ever provided in this parcel of whiskey. And so where they lost was this actually just people they sold it as teaspooned, and it's actually a proper single malt. I guess
Mhm.
we will never truly know.
Yeah. One, for those who don't know, teaspooning is when you add a drop of something else so that people can't call it a single malt. And it could be like literally a molecule of any other single malt in the cask, and it's no longer a single malt. However, back in the day, they could just put this on the casks when they traded them, and you have to assume that it is what they say it is, whether they did the teaspooning or not, I think is the issue. And if you are literally putting a teaspoon into 250-liter cask, how much of a difference is that going to make anyway?
Indeed. Lovely dram though. Some like real tropical sort of fruit on it. Some
Very
pineapple
tropical.
and guava. A little bit of like almost like like a fresh coconut or like coconut leaves or something else like that, where there's just slightly sort of floral herbal note to it as well, I feel like.
I'm going to take your tropical notes and I'm going to add to that a little bit of dim sum. So coconut balls, which sometimes come with dim sum, but more importantly, steamed pork buns, barbecue pork buns.
Mm.
Getting a little bit of that on the nose to add to those nice tropical fruits. It's quite waxy.
Mm. Yeah. What a lovely way to start out the evening though.
Yeah, nice palate. It's quite dry. I mean, it is starting to show its age a little bit. I think you're seeing a little bit of a bitterness creep in on the back of the palate. Um, not everything can mature indefinitely, but it's still on the right side of like being very drinkable. Lots of tropical fruit, those coconut tones you mentioned there, the waxy notes, and some nice, like really bright, tasty fruit tones.
Yeah, very much so. It's interesting, because this was bottled at 46%, so I'm assuming there was a
Mhm.
slight bit of dilution to get down there.
Mhm.
Probably not too much.
No.
But I actually bought a bottle of this when I was there in June, opened it, and I really found after 2, 3 weeks, a little bit of oxygen on there really opened up some of the beautiful sort of creamy tropical notes in a lovely way.
Well, we'll have to see how that opens up when we come back for the speed round. There was another point that I wanted to make about this one, but I don't recall what it is just now. Oh, I know what it is. No, this is not available for sale before anyone asks. This was a whiskey that we put into a ballot a month or two ago, which is the same with the next whiskey we're about to try, which I suppose on one level it might be a good segue. But that's why I had to go to the Cadenhead or no, Cadenhead. We decided it's just going to be Cadenhead tonight website for it. So why don't I pop that next one up as well? It is the Enigma Highland Single Malt 40 year. Now, Doug, I don't know if this was there when you were there or not, but the rumors I've seen about this is that it is Glenmorangie,
Yeah.
or at
Well,
least
interesting.
one suggested it was Glenmorangie.
That's right. They've actually had a parcel of my understanding is 85 and 87. And so there's a Cadenhead Club that you can join. They've just reopened again. So for
Mm,
folks who aren't members, certainly recommended. You pay a one-time fee. You get 2 free warehouse tastings a year and a couple of other things, including special bottlings for Cadenhead Club members. And they did a 37-year-old from the same parcel a couple of years ago, also highly regarded. But yes, I
mm,
believe I was. My guess would be is that it would almost certainly be Glenmorangie.
mhm. Now they've said hogshead, and down here in the bottom it says bourbon hogsheads. But there's an interesting kind of tanginess on the nose that would almost make me have guessed sherry hogshead as opposed to a bourbon hogshead.
Well, you always have to wonder when if it's a bourbon hogshead, they've reconstructed a barrel into a hogshead, and so
Mhm.
you might grab a couple of extra staves or something else like that. Maybe
And
you never quite know with it.
yeah, it's a fair point. Um, well, this, if the last one was kind of dim sum, this is more like Chinese food. It's got that sweet and sour pork and maybe lemon chicken on the nose.
Now, Andrew, I feel like I should wait till at least the fourth or fifth dram of the evening before I bring this up, but I feel like you've got a hankering for some Chinese food right now, given the fact that this is your third tasting that you've recorded for the day. Or is that
It
just
is, it's true. It is the third tasting for the day. I do have some TNT Market barbecue steam buns for my dinner later on tonight, along with some leftover dim sum broccoli, which came in a massive portion. My wife was not willing to help me eat on Sunday. So I do come off a fresh visit for dim sum and a craving for a proper Chinese food dinner at some point in the near future.
well, I have to say on this one, not quite as much tropical notes, some lovely creaminess and a little bit of
Mhm.
citrus in there, but I would say less wood influence. Not
Mhm.
quite the same sort of tannic, slightly sort of like floral note that we got on the last one, even though this is older.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me is that on one level I agree with you. Like the fruit's not there on the palate. Like there's a little bit of, citrus fruit, maybe some candied citrus fruit, and it's quite nutty and surprisingly kind of malty for how old it is. But it's also quite toasty, and I'm finding kind of like this dry oakiness to it on the palate.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be this would be fascinating. Like I always think about like the journey of whiskey, right? Where you go through and whiskey kind of goes on a bit of a roller coaster where, it's there are different points where you might be able to bottle it at sort of a peak in its journey.
Hmm.
I wonder what this would have been like even 5 years ago or something else like that. Not to say there's anything wrong. I think your peanuts note is dead on uh
Hmm.
with it, but
Yeah. I, I kind of agree with you in the sense that I think this one might be slightly over the hill. It probably could have been bottled 3 to 5 years ago and would have been a little bit brighter.
yeah.
Whether it would have been any fruitier is, I don't know.
Yep. No, I think that's absolutely fair. And the toasty note, that sort of toasted wood note, very much almost like again, we're on a coconut kick, some toasted
Mhm.
coconut flakes
Oh yeah,
almost.
absolutely. Well, I'm just trying to think what my experience is with old Glenmorangie. And the sad reality is almost all of it, except for the old 25, used to be like, or would be like in some kind of wacko wine finish. And so even if you wanted to say, this is the profile that I expect of Glenmorangie after X years, I'm not even really sure what it would be. Like it's a fairly light distillate. It's got those giant tall stills, as tall as a giraffe, you could say. But yeah, I don't know what that distillate is like at a great age or how it even holds up over time.
Well, I remember when a while ago being in Glenmorangie tasting and them sort of talking about that everything they produce is made to be bottled at 10 years old. And then so
Mhm.
many of their other releases are just, finished in something else once they hit 10 years old in sort of that sweet spot of, 13, 14, 16, 18 years old.
Mhm.
Um, so it's interesting when you get a parcel like this that gets split out in age for much, much longer.
Mhm. Um, yeah, it's interesting. It's not, it's, maybe I'm being too harsh, but I think my hopes were a little higher for this than I thought it would be. Um, what we might maybe do before we move on to the next whiskey, so to pace this out a little bit, is to dive into a little bit of the history of Cadenheads. Founded in 1842 by a gentleman named George Duncan in Aberdeenshire. His brother-in-law, William Cadenhead, joined the business in 1850s after he'd had a bit of an adventurous time working as a vintner for another company in Aberdeen, and then following that gentleman by the name of Johnny Garrow, which sounds like he would have been the sort of, I don't know, that name sounds like the sort of fellow you wouldn't want to mess with. Joined him down in Liverpool and worked for him for a short while before he came back to Cadenhead to join the firm. Um, and he was there until 1904. At the time of his death, he was a well-respected local citizen, poet. And in 1904, he was replaced by Robert Duthie. Now, Doug, you have a Duthie's bottling or two there.
Yeah.
Props to share.
That's right. A couple of fun ones. This is an old Kensington Wine Market release back when they used to have a bunch of 9-year-old long rows, which are really neat with it. So some of the Duthys, I think, originally were meant for Asian markets and a couple of things because I don't remember seeing them too much outside of a couple of spots in Canada.
So when they initially came in, they were our exclusive for about 5 years. And that was because prior to that, Springbank would sell us the odd cask, and then all of a sudden they couldn't do that anymore. So going back in that time, whether it was Randall Watson or Pete Curry, one of them said, "Hey, well, why don't we just like peel off some of our Duthie's releases for you?" And there were some pretty cool bottlings in that. There was a 16-year-old Ardbeg that I remember was
Yep.
was quite nice. In the back of my head, I want to say a rum finish, but I'm not 100%. sure on that. There was a number of cool things that we had, but they were fairly young, and this was just before they came out with the Cadenhead small batch range, which was the predecessor to the original collection. But the thing that was cool about that small batch range that they created for export was that it was at cask strength, and they could be single casks or they were, just a true small batch. And I could very easily go grab one from my office, but I'm not sure it's necessary to make the point. And
Yep.
by office, I mean my cellar. It's not really an office. I don't know why I used that word. But anyway, Robert Duthie is kind of the next stage of the Cadenhead story. He ran the business from 1904 until 1931. And he was a bit of an interesting character. He started bottling rums as well as whiskeys. He created some proprietary blends like the Puchaside and the Hielandman. And Doug, I think this is an opportunity for a second prop because you
Yeah,
have
let's
a
look at
bottle of
this.
the Hielandman then.
This is a special 1970s release uh,
Oh,
that they had. So a mini that I was able to procure from some strange corner of the world with it.
yeah.
And I did have a put aside, and they've just reopened or they've just relaunched the put aside blend very
Oh,
recently in the Cadenhead shop when I was there.
yeah. They couldn't pick a perhaps worse name for people to have to try to figure out how to pronounce. But I guess props to them on that because, you know, it's Campbell Tune and they're going to do as they're going to do. Um, I remember one of the stories about Duthie was that he was kind of ahead of his time in the advertising department. That he would advertise in programs for local productions in Aberdeenshire. He was one of the first businessmen to advertise on buses and trams. Now, why this is interesting and possibly um, a little bit ironic is that during the downturn of 1929 and the early 30s, he was still doing this because the business was limping along and he was trying to keep it going. But in 1931, he was run over by a tram. And I always wonder, and I hope that it was not a tram advertising either Cadenhead's or the Duthie's label on it at that particular point in time, but we'll never know. Um, the decline of Duthie's really happened after this. After Duthie passed away, his sister, a woman named Anne Oliver, well, his sisters took over. They were, I believe, fairly religious, not interested in business. They wanted to focus on the church. And they put a woman who was working in the business, a long-term employee named Anna Oliver, in charge. And for somehow Cadenhead's managed to limp on for about another 40 years under Ann Oliver, but it was very badly managed. The company eventually went into insolvency, but the curious part about that insolvency is that when it went bust, the assets at auction greatly exceeded the value of the debts. So it just seemed she wasn't selling enough. She was just hoarding stuff, but she had a lot of good assets. She just didn't seem to know how to let go of them or how to sell them. But this is the most fascinating story is that Headley Wright from Campbellton, whose family owned the Springbank distillery, um, decided to purchase a number of the assets. And the most attractive thing to him in the auction of that company, because there was a bottle shortage at this time in Scotland, were the empty bottles. But the most fascinating part of all this is Headley Wright bought an independent bottler, not for the casks, not for the branding or the shop front, but for the empty glass bottles they had. By the time he went to inspect his purchase, the bottles had gone missing. So after all that effort, all that intent to go and buy the bottler for the empty bottles, which were, I suppose, rare as hen's teeth at that point in the early 70s, there were no bottles to be found. So,
Well, and interestingly enough, Springbank is actually going through another bottle shortage right now as we speak. So, Kilkerran and some other ones have moved over into a different bottle shape as they go through what they think is going to be about 2 year shortage of glass for at least their sort of flagship bottle design.
wow. Well, I mean, we've seen, and maybe that's part of the reason why we've seen so many like releases of that Cadenhead Enigma series that might have otherwise just gone into the original collection or other bottlings. And we've obviously seen Kilkerran, first the 16 year, that limited release, and now the 12 is also in the tall round bottles, which I don't have a problem with. I don't know about you, Doug, but I miss those old Springbank bottles in the tall round with the elegant big S label.
Yep. Yep. Very
Yeah,
much so.
yeah. But
Um,
bespoke bottles, all the rage.
all the rage right now. Might I suggest, though, as we continue to opine on these things, that we move on to a beast of
Yeah,
sorts from Dufftown.
indeed. So we are on to an 18-year-old Craigellachie. Craigellachie, obviously famously a distillery with worm tubs that makes a somewhat sulfury, meaty spirit. Put that in the chat and I will share it on screen here for you. So this is from the original collection, bottled at 46%. It's a 2006 vintage. Matured, it says here in refill Oloroso hogshead. I mean, possibly it also might be that it's finished. A lot of these are finished, and I'm not sure who set this one up. So I can't say that this is definitely a full term maturation, but it might be. Nevertheless, Douglas, what do we get with this Craigellachie of 18 years?
Well, I think when I first noticed this, this is, so many people love referring to sort of Dave Broom's original quote about Mortlock being the beast of Dufftown. I really feel like both Ben Rinnes and Craigellachie give it a real, and Dow Ewan even at certain times,
Mhm.
give it a real run for its money in terms of big meaty spirit with worm tubs and
Mhm.
lots of malty character.
I suppose the only problem is that none of those are located in Dufton. But
There is that small little point.
Craigellachie could be considered the beast of Craigellachie because it is in the hamlet of Craigellachie.
I mean, we're hundreds of meters away as opposed to in the case of Ben Rennis and Tell you in,
Yeah.
a dozen or so kilometers. But yes,
The nose is initially, I mean, I was almost initially worried that it had a slightly sulfurous hit to it. But if it's there, I think it's more the distillate than anything else because it's kind of burned off right away. A little
of
bit of
course.
a little bit of underlying notes of fromage there.
Un petit peu, oui. Yeah. No, it's but like a big heavy like brie or something else like that, where it's an old aged sort of creamy, almost blue note.
Hmm.
Mm. Yeah, there's even a slightly sort of sour citrus note right at the end of the palate
Hmm.
there too,
Yeah,
which
it's a
just
little
kind of,
tangy.
yeah, just trails off slowly at the end.
Hmm.
Lovely dram. I don't think this is a finish. I'm gonna stake my claim that I know it's all the rage with the kids these days to finish everything
Hmm. Yeah.
with it, and maybe I'm
And
gonna
by the kids, you mean the kids at Cadenhead.
the kids at Cadenhead. I would say there's another rather prolific independent
Hmm.
bottler these days that has a monthly tasting at your shop that
Hmm.
loves throwing everything it can into fresh wet sherry casks.
Whomsoever do you speak of?
I again I speak in riddles
Of
with it,
course.
but I think this is something that there's a softness there that if it
Yeah.
was a finish, it was a very short one, or it was a finish in a second fill.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. There's nothing that kind of, and it's not so sherried that it would explain that why they would have done it in the first place. Like the sherry's a fairly light touch. I mean that cheesiness is there, which I like because Craigellachie has a fairly long fermentation for a fairly commercial make. Because let's be honest, until recently, until the last really 7 or 8 years, there's never been any focus on it being a single malt. It was made for blends, particularly the Bell's, I believe, group of blends, um, and amongst others. And Dewar's. Dewar's is the other one that it was a big part of. Uh, but I quite like it. It's for refill sherry. It's still kind of naked.
Yeah.
There's some nice soft orchard and citrus fruits there. I mean, I'd have to put this side by side with the 17-year-old, the distillery bottling, which I really like, partly because it's a fairly naked
Yeah.
spirit and allows some of those more delicate fruit notes to start to develop.
No, I think it's, the 13 is an OB that I always love recommending to folks who are sort of starting out
Mhm.
and looking to not break their wallets too much,
Mhm.
readily available. The
Right.
17 gets into some beautiful stuff and even some of the exceptional cast. But for
Yeah.
me, whether we're talking about Craigellachie or Ewan or Ben Rinnes or even Mortlock, I need to start getting into an older age to start, appreciating it because it's just such a big spirit often
Mhm.
that it's nice to be able to see it like this where the sharp corners are starting to come off nicely.
Yeah. Well, we had obviously had that gorgeous whiskey sponge bottling for the store 20-year-old, which was kind of what I was getting at, where it gets really light, really delicate, really tropical. I know there was some chatter in the chat about how do you actually pronounce it. My understanding is that the proper one is Craigellachie. You put a bit of an emphasis on the E in the middle. I suppose if Billy Walker bought this distillery, he'd probably, you know, capitalize. I don't know. He can't capitalize an E because it's not in there. Or I guess, yeah, it is in there. It is in there. What am I talking about? It'd be Craig Elachie, I think is how he would spell it. All one word, but with a capital E. Interestingly, we do have a Craigellachie in Canada, located quite close to Sicamous, BC. It's about 15 kilometers. The locals there pronounce it Craigellachie, which is fair enough. But for those who don't know, it's where the last spike in the Canadian Pacific Railway went in. Because the railway was running out of money, they sent a telegram to Scotland that said, we need money. And the response back from the Grant family, which owns a lot of distilleries in Scotland to this day, but was a well-do clan back then, was stand fast, which meant the money was on the way. So, slight little history detour there for you with Canadian Craigellachie.
And also a famous whiskey blend called Stand Fast, one
That's
of the
right.
the original ones dating back to the 30s and 40s, if memory
And
serves.
was it Grant's stand fast as well, or was it just, yeah, stand fast? That's what I
I,
thought.
I, if I have enough drams, I actually have a early 60s release of it that
Yeah,
I can show and tell in a little bit since I'm on a kick today.
nice.
See.
Well, when in Rome. Uh, in the interest of keeping things rolling, we're going to move on to a Tomatin next. So this is another older release. Um, Fair to say Cadenhead has done a good job of getting their prices down in recent years. So we're starting to see a little bit of better value. Let me pop it up on screen. Here we go. 16-year-old Tomatin. This one was matured in hogsheads and then re-racked into sherry hoggies in 2020 before bottling. 16 years of age, 46%. Apologies that the Kensington staff have not gotten around to taking our own photo of it and are instead still using the approximate color mock-up that is on the Cadenhead website, but it is what it is.
Oh, this is lovely. Well, in the spirit of getting the chat going, is it Tomatin? Tomatin? I mean, what are we even talking about here?
Whenever we'd have the Scots, and I realized Tomatin lost one of its Scots recently to Inchdarney and Co. But the Scots, I'm pretty sure, when they were around, pronounced it Tomatin. I think that is, I don't think they ever said Tomatin. Uh, but maybe, again, maybe there's the pronunciation when you're dialing up your Scottish nationalism versus when you're in market. Who knows?
Indeed. Well, in what part of Scotland you're in? I'm sure
Yeah.
there's all sorts of things, but this is lovely. But there's
Hmm.
I love the Stroopwafel and banana notes that it had on the screen there, but there's
Yeah.
almost like a Shirley Temple cherry sort of
Mm.
note, like a maraschino cherry that I get out of that.
The Stroop waffle is good, but to me, it's more like those hard ginger snaps that my dad used to love. Um, and the only way I could drink them, I think he would eat them straight, but I always had to take a little glass of milk and dunk them in the milk before I found that they were entirely edible. Quite spicy though.
Mm. Again, a lo lovely creaminess there on
Hmm.
the palate and mouthfeel. I really like that.
I mean, that seems like quite close to what you'd expect from the DNA of Tomatin. A little nutty, quite malty. Looking at the stills, like the stills from what I recall are fairly big, not entirely dumpy, but they're more dumpy than not. And I think you get a fairly heavy spirit from it that tends to be quite grassy, quite malty. Mercifully, I find that it's not kind of barnyardy like some of the other distillates in that part of Scotland, like your Ben Rennes, uh, which is more of a like a yeah, the more of a barnyardy note than kind of a malty, grassy note.
Hmm. Yeah, I've been to the distillery a couple times. I've never been able to sync up with a tour at all and actually
Mm.
see the stills. I just tend to go in and look at their shrine to antiquary, their sort of big blend that Tomatin goes into.
Which we don't even see here. Um, Tomatin, for those who don't know, is owned by a Japanese company. Takaro Shuzo, I think is the name. At one point, it was the largest distillery in Scotland, and by like a lot. I think it topped out at the time somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 million liters. Uh, it might have actually been 20, but they never used that. They had 23 stills. When you visit today, they've stripped out 11 of them. So there's still a dozen stills there. But I mean, they really don't need them. I think they're only producing a couple million liters a year, most of it for malts. The reason it was such a big distillery in the 60s and 70s was that it was expected that the demand for blended whiskey would just keep growing forever. Tomatin was also on the Highland rail line, connecting it with the Central Belt in Scotland, which meant it could get shipments of barley by rail direct to the distillery as well as casks. So it was a fairly convenient site to make a large volume of whiskey. If you've ever been to the Speyside, you'll know that even today, one of the worst things is to get stuck behind a malt lorry because they really block the road. They're hard to pass. They're usually only doing about 40 miles an hour, and there's a lot of them. And when the weather's bad, they can sometimes not make it up the hilly roads to some of the distilleries in the region. But Tomatin, with this rail link, was fairly self-sufficient, and that's why it became such a big distillery.
Hmm. They also make a peated series, which I'm going to ask for confirmation because I feel like I mispronounce it or I have historically.
I believe it's Kuboken.
Kuboken. Okay.
Yeah, Kuboken. For those who don't know, and I actually don't know if she's accurate or not, there is an Instagram account. I think the sole thing she tries to do in said Instagram account is look attractive and then pronounce the name of Scotch whiskey brands. And it's the Duchess of Islay. If you've ever wandered on Instagram, I think it's kind of both cute and annoying at the same time, so I don't really pay much attention. But close to 250,000 people seem to think she's offering a worthy service, so God bless her for doing that. Doug is reserving comment, which is fine. Where are we? I think we're on to an Enigma next, aren't we? The Enigma Lowlands,
Yes. Yes. And this one I think is probably going to elicit a bit more of a conversation as to speculating on what it could be. I suspect I've got one or two guesses, but I'll be interested to hear
wow.
your
So,
perspective.
well, Doug, we can dissect this a little bit. I think that could be fun to sort of pick this apart because what do we know? 2013 vintage Lowland single malt, matured in refill Oloroso casks for 11 years, bottled at 57.5%. So we don't know which Lowland whiskey this is, but 2013, what were our options? Glenkinchie, Auchentoshan, and Bladnoch. And was
Bladnoch.
Bladnoch even producing?
A little bit, not much. With it, this was Raymond Armstrong was
Mhm.
no, was had left by then. So we had the what is his name? The Yogurt King of Australia.
The prior, something prior? That's an interesting. Raymond Armstrong left. No, 2014, Doug. It was liquidated
2014.
in 2014.
Okay, so
So
this
the
could have been
crazy Irishman might have still been there.
So I'm going to go out on a limb just at first nosing and say this is not triple distilled.
I don't think so either.
So if I were to be a betting man, because I don't think he was selling Raymond at Bladnock was selling some, but we've started to see some parcels of Glenkinchie hitting the market a little bit. I know our friends at Elixir had a
Mhm.
Glenkinchie out a little while ago around the same age. So if I were to be a betting man, I would guess we're going to the east coast of Scotland, just
Mhm.
south of Edinburgh into Glenkinchie territory.
Yeah, into a lovely little, I think they would call it a dell in the States, kind of a hidden little hollow where they built a distillery. Um, and I would say a beautiful distillery at that. If whoever's been there, they did have, although I've heard rumors it might not be there anymore, they did have like this incredible miniature working model of a distillery that I think was built for some kind of exhibition. And it's on display at the Distillery Visitor Center. I hope it's still there because it was just a beautiful, fascinating little thing. Um, but there's an interesting story behind Glenkinchie, and uh, Doug might be able to fact check me on this, but there was a lot of consternation in some circles in the mid 90s because Diageo realized they hadn't shut down enough distilleries in the early 80s. They needed to find further redundancies, one of which, in the end, was Bladnoch before they sold it to Mr. Armstrong. But they also had two other distilleries. They had Glenkinchie and Rosebank, and they had to decide which of them to get rid of. They believed they only needed one Lowland single malt to represent them in their classic malt range. And the logic was at the time that Glenkinchie was more modern. It had just been recently updated. It had more production. And Rosebank had a whole raft of issues, including some water. The canals were in rough shape. It was a bit of a hot mess. But the sad part about it was Rosebank was a traditional triple distilled lowland whiskey. Glenkinchie was not. And I believe that the whiskey intelligentsia believed that the decision was down to Rosebank just wasn't Scottish enough. So they got rid of it in favor of Glenkinchie. But in some ways, Glenkinchie is not really regarded by people as being true to that lowland style. And I think that's where some of the anger comes in.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely fair. There's a ton of these historical things of, Cleela staying open because it was slightly more modern than Port Ellen, right?
Mhm.
Jura staying over open over Bruichladdich. Rosebank had all of the issues that you mentioned. They also had a huge effluent problem that they needed to deal with, and just wasn't quite worth the investment. And so that, along with the fact that Glenkinchie had a larger capacity and was slightly more modern, meant that it was
Mhm.
just easier to keep open and less investment to sort of keep going, was my
Mhm.
understanding.
But also sounded more Scottish. So,
I mean, that's fair. Now it's one of the four corners of Diageo. For those who have gone over,
mm,
Diageo spent tens of millions of pounds doing five different big expansions. Sort of the four corner malts of the Johnny Walker blend, which is Cardew, Clynelish, Cahuilla, and Glenkinchie. And then
mm,
they also opened their big Johnny Walker experience in downtown Edinburgh
mm.
with it, with much like, oh shoot, what's the whiskey bar in Paris? There's like four secret rooms that
Oh, yeah, the Golden Promise,
Golden Promise, thank you. That
which
the
also, for those who don't know, shuts down during Whiskey Live Paris. So don't think you can go a day early and enjoy whiskeys at Golden Promise before Whiskey Live Paris because they close it.
Yes, yes, but you can see a great rugby game potentially. So
You can see a great rugby game, especially if the French get knocked out early and no longer want to go watch World Cup rugby.
I
But that,
appreciate at least two of us understand that reference, Andrew. So
but but we digress.
we
This is
like,
lovely. It's malty. I mean, I would guess this is a Highland malt. Like I would guess this is something like Royal Brackla if I didn't know any better. I would never guess that this is Lowland, but I suppose that doesn't really matter because as we know today, regions are meaningless. Like Loch isn't making traditional Lowland style whiskey. Holyrood isn't making traditional Lowland style whiskey. Lag, which is on the island of Arran, but technically a Lowland distillery as well, is not making traditional Lowland style whiskey, whiskey regions are ultimately meaningless in this current era.
They are ultimately a social construct. I mean, you can make arguments around Isla and
Hmm.
maybe Campbelltown.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, when you only have three distilleries, two of which are owned by the same
Yeah.
people, there's a bit more of an argument that you can make Isla with its peat. Although I think we are actually in a massive change in Isla now
Hmm.
that Lafroig and Bowmore and the majority of distilleries on Isla are using little to no Isla peat anymore. Now that Port Ellen has cut them all off, I think we're going to get a fundamentally different style of whiskey. But again, that's probably a conversation for a different day.
That is a conversation for another day. And also probably something that a decision that ultimately Diageo might come to regret in the long run. Um,
Very much so.
Got to play nice with your neighbors, I think is the lesson there, even when it's tough. Uh, One last whiskey to go through, and then we'll do our speed round, and then we'll go and touch on some rums. So this last one is the Enigma Orkney. Now, when you think Orkney, this one is sadly sold out, but it is still on our website, so we'll share it. And it has a much more current bottle shot that does not look like the Cadenhead website. Let me pop her up here for everybody. And I should add that Enigma Lowland is still available for sale for anyone who did find themselves loving it. So this is a 2016 vintage Orkney malt from ex-bourbon barrels for 8 years, 57.5%. Uh, and what is the other note there? No mention of peat in the tasting note. So what is this? Let's dive in.
Well, first of all, this is lovely. Is the first note that I get. If I was having this blind, there's no way that I'm guessing this is only 8 years old. With it, I think this is certainly got a profile that's well beyond its years, which is I can see why it's sold out.
Could this be why a certain Billy Walker might have been interested in this
I
distillery?
so yes. So again, we've only got two distilleries. I think Stromness has been closed for a minute at this point. Two
Yeah.
distilleries to choose from on Orkney. And so most times, and certainly with Cadenhead, they get quite a bit of Highland Park with it that comes through. But I think to your point, Billy Walker loves talking about the fact that he'd love Scapa at some point
Mhm.
with it. And Scapa is such a unique distillery for all sorts of different
Mhm.
reasons with it that it's a fun speculation to think, could this be a Scapa?
Well, Billy Walker did approach Chivas Pernod Ricard with an offer to purchase the Scapa distillery. And I believe the story from there was, we won't sell you Scapa, but how about Glenallachie? So he was not initially interested in buying Glenallachie after he sold Glendronach, Benriach, and Glenglaza, but they weren't willing to sell him the one distillery he wanted, so they offered him a different one.
Well, and I think what you could probably argue that was a much better thing in the long run for him. I mean,
Mhm.
owning an island distillery is both amazing and um, difficult, even more so than owning a regular one, as opposed to Glenallachie, which had, a huge amount of stocks. I put it in the same sort of realm as
Mhm.
what Kinder and Rauschbier are trying to do with Tormore right now, where you've got,
Mhm.
a distillery, a real workhorse, beautiful place, lovely location. You're going to be able to open it up for
Mhm.
tourism in a way that you couldn't really with Tormore and have so much more stock and production capabilities
Mhm.
with. But Tormore, or rather, um, you know, Orkney is so beautiful, and Scapa, I think, actually is a really underrated distillery because we see a little bit of independent bottling from Gordon MacPhail, but outside of that,
Mhm.
you see a couple of Pernod sort of special one-offs. Their
Mhm.
14 came and went and was lovely back in the day. They've tried to
There was
kind
a
of,
12 before it.
you know,
Yeah.
so
Well, I mean, Scapa, I think, has a similar story to the likes of Glen Scotia in the 2000s or Ardbeg in the 90s, where production was very intermittent and it was often being done. My understanding is that Scapa was only run a couple of months or weeks a year, depending on the availability of the employees from Highland Park during their silent season. to basically go to that distillery and run it because it wasn't running for most of the 2000s until probably the later stage of the 2000s when it really got going again. So yeah, I mean, it would be a difficult distillery to buy because you wouldn't have had a depth of mature stock. You might have a lot of stuff from about 2010 on, but before that, you wouldn't have had much to work with.
Yeah. But you beautiful, beautiful location on Orkney.
Mhm.
Um, of course, classic Scapa. When I went there, they had a handwritten note on the door saying, "We're short staffed today, so try it tomorrow and we might be open."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I fortunately got in there for my dad's 75th birthday. So about 8 years ago, I took them, he and my mother there, because my mom's family's from the far north of Scotland originally. And we went to Scapa. My dad and I managed to get a tour in, had a great little tasting, had a nice visit there. I suppose the other reason why Billy might have been well off not opening a distillery on the Orkneys is that, unlike, say, Isla, the people on the Orkneys are not quite as friendly. They're a distinct group of people. They're wary of outsiders. It's a really different mentality. The first time I went there, about 2006 or 2007, I was actually warned not to wander out at night because if I ran into the wrong group of people from the pub, I could be in a bad way. I never had any issues, but it's not like Isla where every car you pass waves at you. It's a very kind of different culture, and part of that is that there's been a movement to secede from Great Britain. As much as Scotland is at times, there's been a sentiment to secede from Great Britain. The people on the Orkneys have at times uh, had an interest in possibly seceding from Scotland. So it's an interesting place. It's a beautiful place, as you mentioned, Doug. I'm sure you'll get a chance to go back and see Scapa at some point in time.
No, and some amazing Canadian connections. Hudson Bay Company used it as one of its major
Mhm.
outposts. So there's all these legendary, Hudson Bay bottlings of Highland Park from 100 plus years ago, which
Yeah.
is neat. But yes, they're in another round right now of succession talk, and yeah, not without its challenges. And I would argue that there are times where I have heard certainly Isla and Jura also having near fisticuffs in the street between locals as they try and debate opening it up to outsiders and other things. But Orkney is very unique in that regard.
Which made me think of one other thing. I can't remember what it is right now, but why don't we do our speed rounds?
Love it.
Best to keep this going anyway. So we're back to that Burnside, which has opened up quite nicely.
Mm.
Reminds me of like honey nut cornflakes on the nose.
I was going to say like a lovely sort of like much more guava fruit,
Okay. Well, we
just
paused there. Uh, at least it didn't kick us out like it did a couple weeks ago. Um, hopefully that's still working. Anyway, you were saying nice guava. It's quite tropical now. I would agree on the
yeah.
nose.
And even some lovely melon, like some cantaloupe and honeydew and some other things like that, which is
Hmm.
great. So
It's a great dram. Okay. Um, Enigma, Highland, possibly Glenmorangie.
ooh, very like a toffee note almost now is coming through for me.
There's like a weird antiquiness to it, kind of like if you were the first person to go into an old candy shop in 40 years.
It's almost like an orange custard. Again, I think this is a dram that is super delicate and is probably gonna just continue to get slightly better and more tropical and then just hit a
Mhm.
cliff and just
Yeah.
completely fall off of it, it feels like from a palate perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I find it's quite musty, uh, nutty, some honey. To be honest, I don't know if time's going to improve this anymore in the glass. I think this is a little bit over the hill for me.
Mm. No, I definitely enjoyed it more the second time around
Yeah.
for it. So interesting.
Uh, Craigellachie.
Oh, so malty. This almost reminds me of like some of those old 96 Glenrothes that
Mm,
were around that were put in some refill sherried as well, and um were a mix of beautiful and very overly malty.
yeah. Some of them though got dreadfully like sulfur tainted. So I
Yeah.
mean, like you're right, there were some great 96 Glenrothes or Glenrothi. Um, but there was also some that were just not good.
Well,
Um,
one of my favorite labels of all time was no, actually, was yours a 97 or a 98?
ooh,
Your Bubblehead label from
that's
our
a good the one that bled. Yeah. The dark AF, as the kids would say, Glenrothes. I think it was a 97.
Mm, it was lovely, but yes,
Yeah.
from our friends at Whiskey Broker. So, well,
Well, maybe we'll see some other bubble jet printed bottles again in the future just for nostalgia sake. I'm just doing a quick search here to see if I can find it. What are your thoughts on this Craigellachie, Doug?
oh, again, the it's such a big multi dram that I think this is a lovely expression at 18 years. But again,
Hmm.
as when we were talking about sort of that roller coaster and arc of maturation, it would
Hmm.
be interesting to see this parcel sort of at like 25 or 30 years old. So
Yeah. No, I think this is one that's got some legs in it. I believe this is the one you were referring to, the syrupy, almost over the
yes,
top sherry Glenrothes 97, bottled
yep.
for a 25th anniversary. Heaven forbid you get the label wet, because it would bleed.
Literally printed on a bubble jet printer. So we were talking
Mhm.
about Raymond Armstrong and Bladnock. His son started a place called Whisky Broker, which was sort of a warehousing and independent bottler, and um, was known for being, and it still is known as one of the sort of most um, best value independent bottlers in Scotland, notorious
Mhm.
for buying casks, marking it up 10% and selling it direct to consumers. But a lot of the cost savings came at the expense of very little
Well,
original artwork. And
and Doug, I know you and I have talked about this before, but I'm a big fan of the tall round bottle, which is
mhm,
the cheapest glass you can purchase to put just about anything in. Anytime you start going bespoke with like an embossed glass or a custom design, it costs money. And as our friends at Springbank are finding out, if you don't get your order in quick enough, you got to wait a couple of years.
100%. So, no, I've still got that. I'm just looking over because I literally still have that bottle on my shelf. I bought a couple of them
There
back in
you
the
go.
day with it, and just absolutely lovely sherry. But yes, this is, I think, very, very solid expression overall.
The Tomatin next up. I mean, for 16 years, it's incredibly fruity now on the nose. It makes me think of like a fruit salad, just an assortment of fruits, like all kinds, grapes, berries, orchard fruits, citrus.
No, I think that fruit salad is a great, great note on it. So a little bit of citrus, a little bit of tree fruit, some stone
Mhm.
fruit.
Lovely
Um,
whiskey. Really
yeah,
nice and creamy on the palate, almost silky.
yeah, no, lovely lineup so far. Not a
Yeah,
horrible whiskey in the whole lot, which is great.
sure will. All right. Possibly, probably Glen Kinchy. What do we think of? Probably not. I mean, let's be honest. This is probably not Bladnock. Like it doesn't. I mean, some of that mid '90s to early 2000s, like well, mid 2000s Bladnock was the stuff that Raymond made was not necessarily the best juice.
No, I mean it's the sort of Cole's notes, right? Is he bought it to turn it into a caravan park, and then realized he wasn't going to be able to make enough money. Beautiful location, just sort of way down in the southwest corner of Scotland, close to the ocean there. Finally convinced Diageo to let him distill and then eventually use the Bladnock name. But some of those releases were just horrible. But at the same time, there was a time at the end of UDL, I think was the owners in 1990, and
Yeah.
like Scotch Malt Whisky Society had a parcel from three different dates in 1990, with January 25th being one of
Mhm.
the best vintages. There was a parcel that was released of 1990 Bladnoch that still is one of those legendary vintages for me, and I'm down to only a few bottles of that I now cherish on the same level
Yeah.
as my children. So,
Well, I mean, that was the Bell's period. I think that's when it was owned by the Bell's
mm.
branch of Diageo. And that's the same period that they distilled and produced the 1988 vintage that we have through KWM, which is another tropical, um, somewhat interestingly, somewhat lavender forward floral Bladnoch, which is kind of unusual. But yeah, I think that there was a couple of parcels before they shut in 93 where probably we're talking long fermentations because they're not making very much. They're probably only working a few days a week. So long fermentations, not rushing their distillation. I mean, the guys who were working there were probably milking the hours as much as they could. And
Yeah.
the result is that you have this really expressive, really intense, extremely fruity whiskey coming out of that era.
No, and that 88 not only reminds me of some of the absolute best characters of Bowmore, but is,
Mhm.
in my humble opinion, one of the nicest whiskeys that you've got on the shelf these days.
Yeah.
With
Not
it.
many left, I might add. Um, But that Lowland, that mystery Lowland, I mean, it's fun. It's malty, quite honeyed, some nice nutty tones. What do we think of the Orkney? And I mean, this could be unpeated Highland Park. I think that's highly unlikely.
Oh, I really really enjoyed that one for the age of what it was
Yeah.
with it. I think that's just, yeah, already starting to get fruity and dignified given
Yeah.
a single digit age.
It's surprisingly like straying into like proto-tropical notes. Like it's quite exotic
Yeah,
for 8
I
years
would guess
old.
it's whiskey double its age if I was tasting that blind. So,
Well, we're about to go into the rums, but before we do, I actually just wanted to quickly look and see because it seems to me that Scapa has fairly long or had, yeah, they have really long fermentations, 160 hours.
wow.
So, I mean, that I think that's the nail in the coffin. This has got to be Scapa because this is not that Highland Park is more honeyed. It's not really kind of a big fruit bomb.
No, no, not at all. I didn't realize it was that long, 160 hours. So that
Yeah.
destroys anything else from a fermentation standpoint in anywhere in Scotland, pretty
Well, I
well
think
up.
the only guy who comes close now are some of those Billy Walker, like going into like over 200 hours for some batches of stuff.
Dornoch Brothers as well. Will rather Thompson Brothers at Dornoch
Mhm.
will do upwards of 400-hour ferments. With it, I know Holyrood every Christmas does a batch of super long ferments, but generally speaking, 160 hours for a commercial distillery is insane.
So, um, I don't know if this was a tasting that you were on with me, Doug, or if that was someone else, but we did come across this on one tasting where we were convinced that possibly the batch of whiskey we had was from an infected fermentation, that it had to be some kind of a flaw. And the reality is, when you do those really insanely long fermentations, you do run the risk that they can spoil. Like something can go wrong with them the longer they run. The advantage of them is you get into those lactic notes, you really accentuate those tropical fruits. Dan Soar from Cotswolds, I love his quote. Think about the fruitiest banana in your life, and it's like when it's rotting, like it's on the verge of rotting. And fermentation with malt spirit kind of works the same way. But I think that you do run a risk that it spoils, and that might be kind of what happened. I mean, there's those batches of Lockendall from Bricklady, which were also very long fermentations. And some of them have that kind of baby vomit note to them. And I think that's an example of something like there's something going wrong in it, and it's getting extremely acidic. But I'm guessing you weren't on that tasting. I'm dying to know which tasting that was now.
No, it's fascinating because Glen Scotia just recently added outdoor washbacks. Dornoch just recently, well, has the whole time literally fermented in IBCs outside with the tops open. So I think one point they found a dead bird inside one of them or something else like that, still distilled it. I look
Okay.
forward to that release. So, but I feel like this is also the best way to transition over into a couple of rums,
Yeah.
where we're going upwards of 2 weeks of fermentation times.
In a
From
tropical climate. All right. Do we dare declare our favorites yet, or do we save those for after? I mean,
I
I've kind of
mean,
identified mine anyway.
well, and knowing your love or lack thereof of rum relative to single malt, I was gonna say, should we hold out in case one of these rums are in your top two or three? But
Yeah, let's do it. Let's give them a fighting chance.
yeah,
So rum number one is a diamond mark. And Doug, you're gonna have to help me on this because you know my knowledge of rum marks and such is not extensive, but I'll put this up on the site. So this is a 12-year-old diamond from Cadenhead. Not much of this left. We've got low stock, 2012 vintage, matured 12 years before balling at 55%. And I guess all we know is that diamond rums are bottled under the El Dorado label, but um, I have no idea which mark of diamond this is.
so if it's labeled as, yeah, there's two different things, right? So just to take a step back, like Diamond is one of the coolest distilleries in the world, in my opinion, because they, and look at the color on that. That's not one of those AI generated ones. That's a legit
No,
color.
this is a Kent. This is a Sean Young bottle shot.
Wow, wow. You can almost
Yeah.
see his reflection in the bottle there. So the really neat thing is Diamond is the last distillery left in Guyana, right? So like
Mhm.
imagine if on Isla every single distillery closed and eventually they all consolidated at Lagavulin or something else like that. And so Diamond Distillery, to your point, has four different sets of stills, including two ancient wooden stills that use.
Wooden pot and a wooden column.
Yes, a wooden pot and a wooden column with it. And so, over time, you actually had these sort of sugar plantations that had used the excess leftover molasses to distill, slowly consolidated as the British unwound the sort of money that they were pumping in to be able to purchase sugar from there. And so you ultimately have these sort of four different styles of stills at Demerara Distillers DDL, also known as Diamond. And so Diamond is sort of the main mark. So there's two different locations inside of Diamond. There's sort of one with the historical stills, and then there's one with sort of the massive column modern stills, which is Diamond. They make a whole bunch of different styles in there. Generally, you're going to get sort of fresh stuff brought over and aged in sort of Europe for the most part, or if it sticks around, a lot of the stuff they'll actually add some level of molasses inside the barrel, or sort of what folks will call doping them with extra
Mhm.
sugar just to sweeten them a little bit, which is generally what you see with the El Dorado line. But
Mhm.
the diamond, back to your question, is the mark could be just a general one because they don't know it was purchased in bulk by sort of there's a company EH here
Mhm.
out of the Netherlands that sort of for the last 200 years marketed and sold the vast majority of rum in the world. And then most folks purchase sort of through them and they'll buy new make, age some of it, and then eventually sell it off to independent bottlers. So it might be a blend, or it could just be this mass produced. Because I think Diamond is, makes a massive amount, like 12,
Mhm.
15, maybe even 18 million liters a year of pure alcohol. So
Sure.
certainly the level of some of the largest single malt distilleries in Scotland with it. So that is
Well,
a long answer that doesn't actually answer the original question that you had, but
so
thank
we
you for.
don't we don't know which mark this is, and even I just checked the Cadenhead website. They haven't declared what it is either. They probably don't know. But Doug, the interesting thing about that amalgamation, so I mean, I believe they're called Demerara Distillers is the parent company now, and it's a combination of Highflute, Portmorant, and more. I forget what the other one was,
Right,
but
it's Diamond. And they had
it's Diamond.
Skelton
Yeah.
many years ago that they try and remake, but Skelton's a style of how they're making the distillate as opposed to a certain type of still, which is what the
Mhm.
other three are.
Well, the reality is, like if you look at Irish whiskey before Cooley, it's the same story. Jameson's, Paddy, Powers, Redbreast, all amalgamated into Irish distillers. And until Cooley opened in 87 or 88, all the whiskeys in Ireland, with the exception of Bushmills, were made at this one giant new Middleton distillery in Cork. Prior to that, or like until like John Teeling shook things up, it had all so they were making all these different styles in the appropriate stills, but in one consolidated plant. So I mean that I think that's kind of the best analogy to understand what happened with Demerara Distillers.
Yeah, no, it's very, very cool. And then we can get into all sorts of amazing stories about a gentleman, Luca Gargano, who owns Velier, that's sort of the most prolific and epic independent bottler of rums, and actually going
Mhm.
over, having dinner with the chairman of Demerara Distillers, realizing that they had a massive parcel of what was then a closed distillery from Trinidad, Caroni. He uh, purchased a small portion of shares directly from the chairman. Um, and all of a sudden, he was given free access inside of the warehouses to buy as much Corona as he wanted, which has now become one of the great legendary rum vintages and distillates out there.
So Doug, here's the question. Is that just a savvy businessman or is that corruption?
I mean, again, having at one point worked for on some of Canada's own international work in countries that are um, certainly in Africa,
Developing.
America, developing. Um, it's a fine line and probably one over we could discuss for a very long time. So
Fair. All right. So what are your thoughts on this? Because it does remind me kind of that El Dorado style, which we normally only see at a lower ABV. It kind of reminds me of a kind of an El Dorado style whiskey. Is this a blend?
yeah, I would guess this is probably either majority or all from one of their modern column stills would be my guess, just based on some of the color and flavor. Again, there might have been a slight amount of additives in there, sugar or elsewise, because there is a sweetness and a darkness
Mhm.
there that, given its age, either probably had a bunch of tropical aging to really pull out a lot of those tannins, or had something extra added into it. So
Yeah. But this is not a crazy mark, I think is fair to say. Like this is a pretty standard Guyanese flavor profile rum.
yes, I would agree with
Okay.
that.
All right. Okay. Let's hop over to Clarendon. What do we know about the Clarendon rum?
Or Clarendon, or as a lot of folks know, Monty Musk,
Oh,
one of the largest distilleries in Jamaica. Again, I think in a similar realm, certainly well over 10 million liters a year of spirit, uh, mostly owned by the locals. I think Diageo has a piece, a
oh.
quarter or a third of it as well.
I think they should just go by Monty Musk. Somehow it seems more exotic than Clarendon does. Clarendon doesn't seem very Jamaican.
No, well, and again, it's one of these. It's sort of in the estate. Monty Musk is the region, I think, if memory serves, with
Okay.
it. So it's one of these weird sort of things.
Oh,
Um,
in the description here, it says the region or the estate, the Clarendon estate, was formerly known as Monty Musk.
okay. With it, I'm assuming you did up the tasting notes because it has one of your favorite tasting notes of all time, which is cola cubes.
No, that is copied from the Cadenhead website. So I can't take any credit for that at all. I do love cola cubes, but I don't find a ton of them. I definitely see the connection on this, but there's something more medicinal to this on the nose.
Yeah. there's definitely a richness there with it. It feels, but there's a Jamaican funk that's unmistakable. So
Mhm,
Clarendon, for the most part, I think had was using mostly in Jamaica. You use something called a double thumper, which is like
mhm,
a triple pot stilled single process of distillation. And then I think about 20-25 years ago, they started adding some of the big columns. And so they make a bunch of different styles with it, where again, Diageo, I'm sure purchases most of the mass-produced sort of column still stuff. But
mhm.
this feels like it could very much be one of those pot still ones.
I think there's something unique to me about Jamaican rums, and I get it whether it's Appleton, Clarendon, is I always get this kind of latex rubber note to them. And it's almost, I mean, this is probably why, and I don't mean to take this down too many garden paths here tonight for you, Doug, but this is probably why Mark Renier thought terroir and rum might have made sense because I don't get that note in rums from other parts of the Caribbean. I've only ever gotten them from Jamaican rums.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, Jamaica is a very, very unique style. Again, you've kind of got like the Spanish style, which is very basic, sort of all column stills. You've got sort of the British style, which you see a lot more pot still distillation, still using molasses. And then you've got sort of the French style, which is very unique in terms of mostly fresh cane juice, sort of in column stills. But Jamaica is unlike anything else, and I think that part of it is terroir in the sense of how it's how you're fermenting and aging and sort of letting the wash develop over time in a way that you don't get there. I mean, Hampton, a sister distillery just down the road, has a minimum of 2 weeks, 100% natural yeasts with it, just because the flora and fauna is so crazy in Jamaica. I think that probably plays into it much more than what Mark would probably see, which is we're going to grow different kinds of sugarcane in 7 different microclimates on an island style.
Well, I think I can clearly define if I think the Monty Musk, the Clarendon is my favorite of the two.
Oh yeah.
I love that burst of fruit on the palate. I mean, it's a style to me like I'm still not into it in the way that I'm into whiskey, but I think the elegance of the Clarendon, especially as it settles down, especially more you get into it, it's just so expressive and so fruity on the palate.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree. I think there's a complexity there that we didn't quite see the same way in the Diamond one, which was very rich and
Mhm,
sort of overwhelming.
mhm,
Um, the Clarendon goes through sort of these cycles of this initial sort of like fruit into sort of those latex sort of notes and
yeah,
plasticky notes that I think you hit on, and that sort of Jamaican funk that
mhm,
a lot of folks go to the extreme of actually shoveling in sort of rotten muck into their stills to add in a level of funk that will literally ruin your palate for a week if you drink a little bit of it, which both I love and I loathe all at the same time. So,
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm going to trigger the poll here in a moment, but the last time I was in Paris for Whiskey Live, the Rest and Be Thankful guys had a rum with like off the charts, like some off the charts mark. And I remember them saying to me, come back at the end of the night because this will kill your palate. You won't be able to taste anything else afterwards. And I did. And then when I finished, he gave me a clean glass. I was like, well, I've got a glass. He's like, no, that glass is ruined. You don't even take it home with you. I mean, it was so insanely over the top. It was almost hard to understand.
there was a time when I started in whiskey where I remember the first time I tried Lafroig and just sort of like left it in the room, and there was like a wafty note. And
Mhm.
then, many years later now, Jamaican rum and Clarion, the Haitian style of rum, are two that do the same thing to me now, where it's a spirit unlike anything else, and even leaving an empty glass on the other side of a room, you're going to be able to get those wafts for some time, just because the spirit is so massive. Quite
Mhm.
neat, but can be over.
Cool. All right, I fired up the poll. Now, Doug, I make this seem like it's the guest's privilege to share their favorites first, but really it's buying myself time to finalize my favorites. Do you have a couple of favorites from tonight's lineup?
I mean, I feel like as usual, you and I are gonna diverge on this. Usually I come out of these where I feel very strongly about a couple of these. Maybe there's a third in the mix. I think we had a great lineup today. I like that 40-year-old the second time that I came back to it. Sort of that fruity note with the peanuts. I appreciate there might have been a time and place where it could have even been a little bit better, but I think that was really lovely. Um, the Lowland was lovely, but I'm actually going to put the Orkney 8 as potentially another one in my top two. And that the Clarendon I actually really loved. I thought there was a complexity and a depth there
Okay.
with that I would throw into the mix as well. What about you?
So is the 40-year-old your third then?
No, no, I think the 40 might have been my first, and maybe the Orkney number two, and then the Clarendon number three.
Oh, interesting. Um, I'm gonna go Burnside number one.
Yep.
Uh, to me, that's just such a drinkable style. I really loved it. Uh, the Orkney for me is an honorable mention. Like I really like it, but I still find it's got so much potential. It's just a little too rough for me. My number two, I'm gonna go Craigellachie. I really like that style. I really like that distillate. And then the Tomatin. I think the Tomatin really showed for me. So Burnside, Craigellachie, Tomatin, with an honorable mention for the Orkney. I really like that Clarendon, but to me, like, there's such a disconnect between the nose and the palate on that it's hard for me to kind of, I don't know, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that.
So I completely agree. What I don't understand though is how you can have, something like the Craigellachie as your number two for the night. But for me, this is so close to Ben Rennes, which I personally love, and you will literally go out of your way just to shit on Ben Rennes all over with me. I feel
It's
like just to
true.
get anger, just to make me angry at the end of a night when we have a lovely night together. I think we're having a great time. And then you just out of nowhere just shit talking Ben Rennes and Lecheg just to get me angry, I feel like. So I
Why
don't know.
would it's funny, that's the first mention of Lecheg this evening. Um, but yeah, Doug, if this makes you feel somewhat better, one of the two tastings Evan and I recorded today, uh, Ben Rennes and what was the other distillery? Ben Rennes, Macallan, and something else were in my top three. And I just thought the irony of that was incredible because these are distilleries Ardmore. It was Ardmore, Ben Rennes, and Macallan. And they were my top three whiskeys of that tasting. And I talked shit about two of them being bad and the third one being full of itself. And they were my top three whiskeys in the lineup.
Yeah, I'm stunned and again hurt a little bit that
Mm,
you continue
that's
to
fair.
just shit talk all of this. So
That's totally
um,
fair. Um, I want to let Doug go soon here because he has another tasting to join in the not too distant future. But three of you have not voted. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to vote if you haven't already voted. To buy you just a tiny bit of time, Evan's got a cheeky third question. Where do you think the Cadenhead Enigma Lowland came from? And the options are Auchentoshan, Glenkinchie, Ailsa Bay, Bladnoch, Daffmill. I mean, I suppose it's fair. It could technically be Daffmill. That we did not mention Daffmill. I don't know that Elsa Bay was operating then. When did Elsa Bay
yeah,
open?
Elsa Bay opened. Yeah, in the late thousands, early thousand aughts, I want to say.
I mean, he's even got Annandale on there. I'm gonna have to fact check
Well,
Evan on this later.
Annandale was an open. Daffmill is a fake
Yeah.
Lowland, so fake news. I mean, really, it's we can make an argument as to Holyrood being in there, but listen, I will die on the vine that if Glengoyne is a Highland distillery, there's no way that Daffmill is a Lowland distillery.
Yeah.
Um, I will fight somebody on that.
Yeah.
Um,
And fourth question, should Evan be upset that Doug considers him to be history's greatest monster. So,
First
um,
of all, Evan is taking quite a bit of liberties, as usual, I will say,
uh,
by the fact that he thinks he's history's greatest monsters. I say he is one of history's greatest monsters. He's
uh,
not history's greatest monster. Again, this exceptionalism from him is just galling.
I
Uh,
think that's an example of how it's important to be precise in one's use of words.
Indeed.
Um,
But I
so,
appreciate that everybody is in absolute agreement on this.
well, let's get to that. So, favorite whiskey in tonight's lineup. Look at that. The Orkney stole the show, followed by the Clarendon, tied with the Highland single malt. Look, Doug, you're in sync with the people. You're a man of the people tonight. Second favorite whiskey is the Orkney. And then we've got a three-way tie between the Burnside, the Tomatin, and the Lowland. Fascinating.
Mm.
What else have we got here? We've got where do you think the Lowland is from? My money is Glenkinchie, beating out Auchentoshan and Bladnoch. I kind of want to say Daft Mill. It might shock you, but I believe this is from Annandale. We definitely know it was not from there. It was quietly produced using the industrially procured stills from Little Mill that have been hidden at an undisclosed garage in Glasgow since 1991. Possibly true, you never know. And let's just get to Evan's final question. Should Evan be upset that Doug considers him to be history's greatest monster? Trademark, apparently, patent pending. Absolutely, Doug is greatly exaggerating the issue, and the focus is a myopic at best when you consider the grand scope of both Western and non-Western based biased histories. Evan barely even makes the top five. I might be leaning towards that. I mean, we got Paul Pot, we've got Stalin, we've got the Big H. We don't need to mention any more about that. I mean, I think the Big P might be creeping up on that list with every passing day.
I,
Um,
I agree with most folks in the chat, which is I zoned out after like the second like line of trying to read what Evan had written, this diatribe of a note that was self-serving. So again, I stand by my original assessment that he's one of, but not the greatest, one of history's greatest monsters. So
well, I don't know if there's another note to end on than that, but I think that's a good note to end on. Doug, thank you very much for joining me for this one, especially for your knowledge of the rums. I would have been a little bit lost having done zero research before tonight's tasting on those, but especially for your insight into the Cadenheads brand. So thank you very much for that. For those of you who are lucky to do the Springbank Society tasting, Doug will be my co-host again in 2 weeks' time. So we'll look forward to that. But Doug, thank you. Have a great night. Everyone else, you have a great night too. And we'll talk again soon.
thanks all.